Hi, this is Piero Giorgio. I made some time ago the interview of Otto Otto Thanning is a South African surgeon, and at 73 years old, he made the headlines to be the oldest man to swim across the English Channel. I was curious to interview him as he has, of course, medical knowledge, and of course, because he has made this quite performing and outstanding physical feat. So I've interviewed him in several parts, and I'm sharing one of those parts with you today for one of my next books that I'm working on. And I thought that the information is quite interesting. And as we say, information not shared is lost, and therefore I'd like to share that with you. So here's a short, very short interview. Forgive me for the sound. It wasn't meant to be put back online. It was meant for my own notes. But hey, I like to share with you guys. So here it is, and you will see it's quite interesting. It dwells about health, about nutrition, about his personal views on how we can improve stuff. It's only part. There's another element which I cannot. It's not good quality enough to be transcribed here. That will be in my book. And anyways, here's the interview. Enjoy because I think it's quite interesting. Ciao. First of all, what's your secret to be so fit at 73?
Um, yeah, for me, it's probably a long-standing one in that I had a history of being a reasonably good competitive swimmer when I was at the age that people compete, at a high level in the early 20s and possibly 30s. I also obviously had a medical background. I was at medical school during that time as well, and I am still very active in medicine. And one of the big challenges in medicine is advising people how to prevent getting problems as opposed to just treating people who have developed problems. And in the cardiac sphere, it's very obvious, and was very obvious to me at a very early stage, that there are significant risk factors to cardiovascular disease, like obesity, smoking, and lack of exercise. And I tried very hard to make an example of myself to my patients that I was trying to remain fit and to do a lot of exercise and not to be overweight, and obviously to eat healthily, and most important of all, not to smoke. So I maintained that from that early or relatively early age. There's been, though, a revolution in the way we as cardiac practitioners think of advising patients or helping patients avoid getting vascular disease. And we always used to say you must eat less fat and proteins and more carbohydrates and vitamins, because if you see somebody who has a heart attack and you actually study or look at their arteries, there are cholesterol plaques, and therefore, obviously, if we're eating too much cholesterol, that's probably what's causing it. And the modern era has now started to show it's the exact opposite. It's excessive carbohydrates that's the problem, and the lack of eating proper fat intake. But that's only very recently. So my aim was just to try and stay fit and strong and keep a very high level of exercise with minimizing the risk factors I mentioned to you of smoking and being overweight and lacking in exercise. And as you probably know, I did swim the channel when I was 53 for the first time. And at that stage, I was in good condition. And I actually did a fairly fast time, which has stood for 20 years as being the fastest time by anybody over the age of 50. It was broken just this last season by a gentleman called Jimmy Clifford, and he swam a time slightly faster, but he was also a little bit older. He was in his early 60s. And I think what I'm trying to say is that it's not been a short-term thing, it's been a long-term thing to try and remain healthy and do all the right things.
They used to say, especially in the past, that there's a lot of importance in genetics. This is an old way of seeing.
Yeah, I have no doubt that plays an important role. And my background, or at least my heritage, or whatever you call it, is actually Northern Northern European. My family or my forebears are from Denmark.
Mm-hmm.
And people in Denmark tend to be quite old. The average age in Denmark is very high. And certainly all my parents and their parents were in their late 80s or certainly in their 80s when they eventually died. But of course they didn't know the things that we know, so they all smoked and they were all overweight and they all ate too much and didn't do much exercise.
So, with good genetics and good behavior, what's your view of the limits of today's longevity potential for men?
Well, I believe that there are quite a few medical studies that seem to indicate that the genome of the human, in terms of genetics, predicts that we should be able to live reasonably healthy to about 120. But the human is also like anything else evolving. Over the last couple of thousands of years, a lot of things have changed in how we are evolving. We are definitely getting bigger brains, and we are also getting older. And I think that's a form of genetic evolution. And the interesting thing is that the older generation, or not the older generation, the people who live longer are usually, funnily enough, in the northern hemisphere, not in the southern hemisphere.
I see. Is there a reason for that?
I don't think so. Well, I'll put it this way, I don't know. But I think there's so much going to happen to the human genome in the near future because, we're starting to fiddle with genes now.
Yes.
On a scientific level. And I don't know where that's going to go, but we can tell diseases that are likely to develop by just doing genetic studies on people. And then one should, in the near future, probably be able to modify some of those genes. So I have no doubt that the human race or the human species will learn and try to become older and also remaining healthier. It's no good to have a lot of very old people who are incapacitated because they have to be supported by the younger people. But if they remain in very good health late in life, I think they're an asset. I mean, just look at the age of retirement. 50 years ago, it was sort of normal to expect people to retire at 55. And now, in my personal opinion, I don't think you should retire until you are becoming infirm or medically unfit.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a thing that's happening, for example, in the airline transport pilot's age limit. That's going up very rapidly. It used to be 55. It's now 65, and they're talking about making it 70. So
now,
you could fly, a heavy-bodied airplane at the age of 70 safely, and that's going to be interesting. I believe in that.
yes. Now, a lot of people unfortunately realize problems with their health when they're about 50. What would be your advice for people who are 50 and seems to suddenly realize that they're maybe overweight, maybe lacking exercise or not eating properly? What's your suggestion or advice for people in terms of nutrition, exercise, or mental attitude?
I think the one thing that's very difficult to know how you can best motivate people, but to motivate people to think about looking after themselves, in other words, to want to be better. So if somebody is overweight, a lot of people who are overweight, they say, look, that's the way I am, and I'm not going to be able to do anything about it. Whereas if you could motivate them to say, yes, you can, and you can lose weight, and you can do exercise, I think that's the first one. The second one is that I believe everybody who has a wish to be fit late into life, in other words, to remain fit for as long as possible, is to take care and go and see a physician who understands that. And there are some very interesting things that you can do. You can look at the state of your arteries, of your vascular system, without necessarily having an interventional or a invasive procedure. In other words, you can do with Doppler studies an assessment of the thickness of the inner lining of the arteries of the body. That is the part of the arteries called the intima. And the intimal thickness is a very good indicator of whether you have inflammatory or disease processes in those arteries, or in all of the arteries for that matter. So an assessment of that may indicate that you have a process that is certainly leading to or already established disease, and if you aggressively deal with that, you can. There's absolute proof that you can reverse that trend. You can actually make it improve. You can actually have arteries with blockages resolve if you are aggressive with the management.
Mm-hmm. In terms of nutrition, what's your advice?
Well, I'm firmly on the bandwagon of the average Western diet up until recently was about 60% carbohydrate based and about 20% fat and protein. And I believe that the carbohydrate that we are sort of eating in the Western diet, which is refined carbohydrate, pasta, rice, bread, and all the things that contain sugar, especially the sugar drinks, are the main problem. And if you can eliminate or reduce those radically, you can then step up the protein and the and the fat intake, and that itself will have a major change in the format of the body in terms of weight, body mass index, the fat content, and the health.
What would vegans or vegetarians think of that, or what can they do to be healthy?
Vegans are. I have a number of friends who are vegans, and I spend hours talking to them about the challenges in maintaining a vegan diet. And most of the vegans I know, it's almost a type of religious thing. They are vegans because they feel that eating animals is inappropriate, and that we deal with the animals that we eat in a way that nobody should deal with any living species. And that's the motivation more than the health of the individual person who is a vegan. That's my opinion. I don't think most of the vegans that I know are they have good nutrition. A lot of them are slightly overweight, and a lot of them are protein deficient. And it's quite a challenge if you're a true vegan to get an adequate intake of protein, simply because there are very few things to eat that are high in protein that are not animal or indirectly animal derived. And these are things like soy and tofu and things of that nature, which are non-animal derived. So you have to eat a lot of that to become, in my opinion, adequately, shall we say, protein not starved. The discussion with vegans is difficult because there is a quasi-religious aspect to it.
I see.
In my opinion.
I see.
I may not be right. I know that certainly two of my friends who are vegans are strongly against what I'm saying. This is what I've just said to you. But apart from fads, in other words, people say, look, we only eat this because we're damaging plants or we're damaging animals. If you deal with people on a purely dietary point of view, if you can limit the amount of carbohydrates you take in and eat adequate amounts of protein and not be frightened of fat, the system that derives its main source of energy in the human body as we are now, which is carbohydrate based, starts to switch to becoming fat for energy. And you can do that. I think a piece of one of the comments I think I sent you at one stage explained the concept of how you fat adapt, how you change your body to use fat as a source of energy, as a prime source of energy rather than carbohydrate. And if you can do that, you can train to do that. You can become fat adapted very easily. It's a challenge, but it takes a while. And once you are fat adapted, you use fat as your prime source of energy. I'm talking about energy as opposed to building bones and muscles and things like that. I'm talking about the source from which we derive energy in terms of calories. And if you can primarily use fat as your source, your turnover of fat is higher, your entire body BMI changes, you can do far more exercise and use far more calories per hour than you can if you're based on a carbohydrate
I see.
form of diet. Swimming, for example, is one of the reasons I came upon this, is requiring probably one of the highest calorific kilometers per hour of swimming at a reasonable rate. It's more than running, believe it
Yes.
or not. And if you do a long swim and are using calories at that rate, it's even higher if the water you're swimming in is cold. It doesn't take that long for you to use all your carbohydrate stores, because our normal storage of carbohydrate is limited. We only carry about 500 grams of glycogen, which is the
Yes.
form in which carbohydrates are stored. So you can burn all your carbohydrate stores after about 6 hours of high-level swimming or running or whatever. And if you think back, there are very few athletic or challenged organized events which require longer than 6 hours of high-level energy output. And the two that spring to mind are the Ironman triathlons, where the fastest winning possible time is around about 8 hours, and endurance swimming.
Yep.
Most other things don't last that long. And if you talk to the people who do those long-lasting, high-calorific requiring sport events, they will tell you that they hit a wall around about 6 to 7 hours. But suddenly their energy goes and they have no power, and if they can work through it, it eventually starts to improve. And what they are experiencing is exhaustion of carbohydrate fuel source and a switch over to fat. And when you switch over to fat in that environment, you get lactic acidosis, and that makes muscles not work too well for a while until the fat delivery of energy is fully established. But if you become fat adapted beforehand, you can use, a standard, a normal adult man will have about 25 to 30 kilograms of fat available for energy. So it's a heck of a lot more than carbohydrate, and therefore you can do these longer things far better if you are fat adapted or able to utilize fat as a source of energy.
Perhaps one last question is exercise, nutrition are essential. How about the mental attitudes, or certainly the mental exercises to keep a healthy mind? A lot of people, unfortunately, get these Alzheimer type illnesses. How can we work on that?
Those type of illnesses are probably related to poor diet for over a long period of time. In other words, a carbohydrate diet over time is associated with a high incidence, in my opinion, of Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and they are also associated with much higher incidences of diabetes. And diabetes is going to be is already an international major problem. As many as 30% of people in America are diabetic, and it's going to go up and up and up and up until the dietary pattern changes. And if you change the dietary pattern into what we're talking about now, you'll find a less likely incidence of Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, which are degenerative in their causation, but also the result of deposition of abnormal proteins in the brain.
Okay, certainly. Well, thank you very much. I don't want to take too much of your time. Say hi to Tim Noakes if you see him. I think he has read my previous book. And for sure, say hi to Cape Town in South Africa. So, what did you think about it? I think it was very interesting, right? First of all, it's amazing. 73 years old, across the English Channel. For your information, I think he did that in less than 6 hours. That's quite fast, and but still, it requires you to be used to swim in very cold water, and of course, perform quite well in terms of swimming. I swim 1 kilometer every day since I'm 15, and swimming and takes me about 25-30 minutes depending on the day. Usually it's 25 minutes. So swimming 5 to 6 hours and potentially being trained to swim much more than that, because I think he was planning for a longer crossing, requires a lot of work. And what's interesting is that first of all, he talks about health and how we can keep our health quite to an old age. and he's estimating that we should be able to evolve and certainly move to, and I would say, provided we don't eat bad food, provided we exercise regularly, provided we have a healthy lifestyle, up to 120 years, which sounds to me quite reasonable. It's not the far out transhumanist or a crazy expectation of 140, 200 years old that we hear sometimes in the media, which I think makes no sense as of today. The other element that I think was interesting is how we can switch to fat burning instead of glycogen burning. This is also very interesting, and I think he gave an interesting point of view on veganism. I'm not sure I share that from other experience I've had. I think you can actually get protein from vegetables, but it was interesting to have the point of view of a heart surgeon. I think also the interesting thing is for non-English speakers, when English academics and doctors talk about carbohydrates, they most of the time means sugars in terms of fast sugars like refined sugars, white sugar, honey, and things like that, which we should limit a little bit our and certainly a lot on the refined ones, but also it does include the vegetables, and sometimes you hear high carbs diet is bad, and I think it is bad. But a lot of people understand carbs as vegetable and say, how can high vegetable and fruit diet be bad? Because fruit and vegetables have high nutritious and nutrition value in terms of vitamins, in terms of minerals, and vegetarians and vegans, if they avoid the sugars too much, I mean the refined sugars, mostly in forms of cereal, wheat, barley, corn, rice, and if they limit that, there's quite a lot of protein into vegetables. I would, if you read my book, I will say that actually a little bit of animal protein is good, not a lot, a little bit. But anyway, that's off the topic. So anyway, it was very interesting to hear Dr. Thanning talk about it. And again, if he watches this, I thank him very, very much, and I wish him long life and more cold water, long swimming. And anyways, if you want to know more about my work, check out the links below. Check out Piero and Giorgio on Amazon and in your bookstores. And certainly, I hope you will like my future book on health. And but that's probably in the future. Take care. Ciao.